Extraordinary Phenomenon Investigations Council presents Epic Voyages. Come join us as we enter and experience the great mysteries of the world with tonight's host,
Dr. Joseph Burkes.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Joseph Burkes, and you are listening to Epic Voyages on the Inception Radio Network. Tonight's show, I'm having a very special guest in that he is a contactee, as many of my guests have, but he's also had in-depth, lifelong contact experiences with a wide range of extraterrestrial intelligences, as well as with perhaps beings from a celestial zone, another dimension. Just to say a few words about myself for new listeners, I'm a board-certified internal medicine physician. I've retired mostly from the practice. I still carry a license to practice in California after 30 years of working for the Southern California Permanente Medical Group. I got involved in the contact world in 1991 when, for no apparent reason, I picked up a book on UFOs. I'd never read about them or was interested in that subject before, and suddenly found myself fascinated. A year later, I met another emergency room physician, Dr. Stephen Greer, and I joined his C5 initiative, and that was a program of going out in the desert and using basic psychic techniques, thought projection, telepathy, to have limited interactions with the intelligence responsible for the UFO phenomena. So I saw that volunteer work as an extension of something I did back in the 1980s when I worked as a volunteer in the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. It was a worldwide movement of physicians that alerted government leaders and the populations of the nations, on both sides of the Iron Curtain, about the dangers of the nuclear arms race. So when I heard about what was billed as a citizens initiative to have kind of like citizens diplomacy with the alleged ETs, I said, sign me up. And now, 25 years later, I'm still very interested in the subject of contact. Tonight's guest, Zen Benefiel, describes himself as a possibilities coagulator, socially mediated extrovert, transformational life coach, and a virtual do-gooder. I like that. Mr. Benefiel was adopted 6 weeks after birth, beginning life as an orphan. A near-death experience in college further enhanced his quest for identity. He speaks and writes on a wide range of topics and does so, in my opinion, with humor, intelligence, and wisdom. His goal is to help facilitate a new world order of harmony among people and with our planet. Zen founded the company Be the Dream in 1998 as a professional service company incorporating a holistic approach to personal and professional development. His professional activity includes being an author, a blogger on several websites, a motivational speaker, and an event producer. Zen has a BS in Business Administration, an MBA in Project Management, and a Master's in Organizational Management. He also has a secondary school teaching certificate. He has crafted and delivered high school and college curriculum. He is also what is known as a contactee. These are people like myself who believe that they have been in communication or some kind of contact with the intelligence responsible for the UFO phenomena. And he's been a contactee since childhood in rural Indiana, something not too many admit, let alone acknowledge publicly. His book, Zendor the Barbarian, includes details of his contact experiences. He also curates a very good website, Ufology PRSS, that has much information on topical subjects and news related to UFOs. He also discusses and speaks about what he calls, quote, star family encounters. His latest book, The God Principle, is described as being a subatomic stroll in being, and it explores science and spirituality in ways few encounter, both experiential and transformative. Zen lives in Arizona, and it is my pleasure to welcome him to Epic Voyages. Hello, Zen. Oh, the musical intro as per Zen Benefiel. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me on the show, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here, and sure that, as you know, with many contactees, it's a challenge for them to come clean, be transparent, even talk about their situation, because most of the time when we do so in public, we're looked upon as being a little wacko, to say the least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know that some of my colleagues, when I first got involved with the subject, said, Dr. Joe Burkes lost it.
Right.
They were wrong. I actually found it.
I think we all have, and it's a completely new living awareness that it brings about of just how connected we really are on multiple dimensions. And, scientifically, you look at it, we see 1% of the electromagnetic spectrum. Well, what if we operate on more of that and had the ability to ascend to that experience simply by intending and asking the right questions to do so?
So you're saying that reality has a full spectrum that includes just a narrow band of consciousness that we are able to embrace, but the universe has a much broader range of consciousness that we can explore if we have the courage and the training, correct?
Sure, absolutely. I talk about it kind of in a tongue-in-cheek way of we've got 5 senses and 10% of our brain. That's kind of an accepted axiom. Well, what if we had the 90% of our brain and the 45 more senses that might go along with it?
Mm-hmm. Life would get very interesting, I'm sure.
It surely does. I would like to make one minor or two minor corrections. I started Be the Dream in 1988 when I was working for an aerospace company as a production control coordinator, looking to bridge business and communication, even spiritual practices in the workplace.
Okay.
And the book, it's the God participle.
Oh, sorry. I'm not the first one to make that mistake. No, I said the God particle.
Yeah. Well, and that's the again, kind of tongue-in-cheek presentation of it, because the participle is a verb that a verb that ends in ing that becomes a noun. And there's a simple answer to what is the God participle? Well, it's being.
With a capital B-E, right?
Yeah, exactly. I present things like that, because it's a lot easier to present things in a humorous fashion. Life is serious enough. And when you begin to have experiences and the types of things that we do, as you know, you take yourself much less seriously.
That's a good sense of humor is an essential ingredient in many occupations and avocations. Being involved with UFOs, you better have a good sense of humor, because
absolutely.
If not, let's face it, it can get pretty difficult without the ability to laugh at yourself and the phenomena.
Absolutely. You mentioned that you happened upon a book one time that led you down the path or the abyss, as the case may be. Same thing kind of happened to me. I had some initial experiences as a kid where I had dreams, or what I thought were dreams, where I'd watch myself get out of bed. I'd climb out my bedroom window, walk across the neighbor's backyard, climb a fence, walk out into a 10-acre cow pasture, and rise up into this orange cigar-shaped cloud where my observer and participant would basically meld, and I'd go into the cloud, and I'd wake up in bed the next morning with the feeling of I can't wait to go back. Well,
now, you were 7 years old at that time, correct?
I was 8, and I had some precursive events happen. When I was 5, I had this voice yell out to me one night, "Hey, you." I was questioning who I am, because I'd found out I was adopted.
So they told you at 5 years of age. That's pretty young.
Well, they kind of had to, because they brought home an adopted sister.
Mm-hmm. I see.
So here's a new kid on the block that just shows up without any, pregnancy involved. And I had seen enough women carrying children that I knew there was a little more to the story than, the stork showing up, right? So my parents were astute enough that they thought that, it was time for them to explain to me what the adoption process was and how much that I meant to them for them to do so. And it still left me with questions that they couldn't answer. And so I had this internal, consternation or inquiry with myself. And then this voice shows up and I start talking to it. And over the next, it came in an evening as I was looking out a window, and it didn't frighten me at all, but it did kind of startle me. And so for the next year or so, I used to stand in front of the window at night with lights on in the house, and I would telepathically call out using that same "hey you" in the same tone, and then I would stand there and wait for it to come back. And I didn't realize at the time, but I was overcoming the fear of darkness or the unknown without even really realizing it.
Well, there is quite a bit to be fearful about the darkness, especially when you're a little kid. I think you mentioned on one of your interviews that when you mentioned to your mom that you had heard this voice, what happened? What was her response?
Well, first of all, she said that she didn't hear it and that it must have been a peeping Tom.
Right.
And
you did have one in the neighborhood, I guess.
Yeah. Well, there was rumor that there was in town. But small towns have lots of rumors.
And this is a small town in Indiana, is that right?
Oh, yeah. We had maybe 6,000, 6,500 people.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very white bread, conservative, mostly Republican. And I realized, as I grew up, that I really didn't fit. But it gave me a lot of solid foundation with the way my parents brought me up and the value systems that they gave me, and the ability to be inquisitive and curious about life, and not necessarily being able to give me all the answers that I was looking for, but at least encourage me to continue asking the questions.
Now, you didn't just ask questions, you also had out-of-body experiences.
Well, yes.
Let's talk a little bit more about that.
Well,
did you engage in astral travel, or were the out-of-body experiences just that trip up to the orange-shaped cloud?
Well, there were some initial experiences that I had of just some out-of-body experiences. The first time it happened, I'd come home from an afternoon of play, and I was kind of tired, and I'd laid down on my bed, and my mind was still racing about something. And as I was laying there, I felt like I was starting to rise up out of my body, and it was a little spooky, I must say. And then there was this voice that I had heard previously just told me to relax and breathe and let go. And so I did, and I popped up out of my body, and all of a sudden I'm at my ceiling level looking down at my physical body on the bed, and I just kind of floated around the house for a little bit and went from room to room, and it's like, oh, this is really wild, and here's a 7-year-old kid, right? Mm-hmm. And I didn't really understand what was going on, but
it happened on a recurrent basis, true?
Yeah, and especially then a year later when I started having the orange cloud experiences, and that happened for a couple of years, about at least once a month that I was conscious of. I don't know how many times, I was unconscious of that happening because, as you said, with the book, this is where I was going with that. I was walking through a metaphysical bookstore in Muncie, Indiana, which is about 15 miles east of where I grew up. And this book falls off the shelf. Nobody else around. And I'm looking around going, what the hell's going on?
Did you brush against the book? But sometimes that happens.
Oh, it was 15 feet in front of me down the aisle.
Oh, my.
And it fell off the shelf. And so I walk up to it, and it's Ruth Montgomery's Aliens Among Us.
Oh,
And
my.
I pick the book up, I flip it over, and the first paragraph that I read says something to the effect of the most common UFO contactee experience in the Midwest in the late 50s and early 60s was the orange cigar-shaped cloud.
Wow. So here you have a highly anomalous, synchronistic event where a book falls under its own power. You leaf through it, and bingo,
They were dead.
It's telling your story.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't suppose you ran home to your congregation and shared that with the parishioners.
Oh, no. At that time, I was 23 at the time. I had had an experience as a teenager in the pre-med program. I was headed down your road for a while. And my second quarter, I had prayed to know what truth was. I had an emotional experience and was just really down and out and wondering, what I'm here to do, and just had that sincere question. So I hit my knees and I prayed to know what truth was, and I was willing to die for it. Well, the following week, it was November 11th, 1975. I came back from class, and of course, now this is 1975. I did the obligatory bong hit and album side meditation, and I was listening to Journey's first album. And during the song In the Morning Day, in between the vocals and the vamp, this voice that I'd been familiar with calls me by name. My given name's Bruce. And it says, "Bruce, are you willing to die for what you believe in?" And after I seized up, I thought, okay, what do I believe in? First thing that came to my mind was Christ consciousness. And it still felt a little empty for some reason. I didn't really question why. I just acknowledged that it did. And so my next thought was cosmic consciousness. And it felt like that encompassed everything. So I said yes. And then there was a guitar riff that Neil Sean does sound like a rocket ship taking off. And I left my body. And I turned to look at my body laying across my dorm room bed. And I was living in the honors dorm at the time. And then turned to look where I was going. And before I could get fully turned around, I was completely engulfed by white light. Now, I realized almost instantly that I could still think. And I was aware that I could think. So I knew I wasn't dead. But yet here I was in this feeling of being home, being completely at one with something and yet individuated within it. Yet there was nothing else but in my sight but white light. I had no tactile sensation, and so the impetuous teenager in me comes up and says, "Wow, is there more?" And then I feel a movement that takes me into this almost opposite type of situation where there's an indigo background and points of light surrounding me. And no sooner did I start to ask the question as to what they were, that I knew that they were points of consciousness. Whether in body or not, I wasn't sure, because I knew I wasn't. Then at that point, the voice picked back up, and this is what's given me my life's mission, so to speak. It says to me, "These are those that you were to work with in order to facilitate a new world order. It will happen in your lifetime. Know this to be true. Your path will be full of trials and tribulations. Have faith and trust that everything you need will be there at its appointed time. Trust and allow." And then I felt another rush of energy, and I'm back in my body taking a breath of air. And I kept my eyes closed for the duration of the song, and probably the rest of that side of the album, just trying to figure out what the over, after having that experience. Well, over the years, I realized that I was given an experience of cosmic consciousness and the condensation back into form afterwards, and then, having to, it was an accelerated learning curve, so to speak, and I didn't get it all because it was nonlinear and non-local.
But let's just talk a little bit about what you experienced. You were there. There was light. You couldn't feel your body,
Nope.
but you acquired knowledge. You acquired information at the level of knowledge. You looked at this design that was before you, and even before you could finish asking the question, what does it mean? Downloaded into your consciousness an explanation, and then you hear the voice. So it's acquisition of information, both telepathically in terms of a voice or another being, and also accessing, perhaps you might call it the great computer in the sky, the cosmic records.
In a bit, huh?
What's that?
I said we'll talk about Ashtar in a bit.
Oh, yeah, we'll get to Ashtar for sure. But we didn't really talk that much about astral travel. When you had those out-of-body experiences as a child, and you were floating around.
Yeah, let me talk about a little more specific astral travel.
Yeah, and did you share that with other children as well? And what happened?
Oddly enough, I didn't. I thought that at that time, after my situation with my parents and talking to them about things, and I kind of asked questions here and there to see what the general experience was, and I couldn't find anybody. So I just kept my mouth shut.
Well, a lot of kids who do astral travel say that they expect everyone is doing it, and then they're shocked to find out that it's a very small number of people who dare even report such incidences.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely one of those. Now, when I was in college, I had a friend that he was a groundskeeper at Camp Chesterfield, which is one of the oldest spiritual camps in the country. That and Lilydale, I think, are the two. But we did a lot of experimentation to see what our abilities are and what we can do with them. And we learned how to exit our bodies almost at will and travel together and go see things and visit people and, view what was going on, then come back and get in our bodies and go talk to them and tell them what we saw. And man, did we make enemies.
So you were running a kind of remote viewing, except instead of remote viewing, you're going remote traveling, sharing that data and your impressions of what you see with the people you were viewing, and it upset them, which is understandable. Now, what were the circumstances of your viewing? I hope you weren't visiting any ladies' locker rooms or anything like that. Because, no. I would be angry if you did, and I was a young lady. Minding her own business. About it
for me and what I've experienced throughout my history of being able to do this is it's a sacred art, and there's a respect one has that just goes along with it. And I've never had the urge even to go beyond personal boundaries and to places where I'm not invited.
So to do this with integrity requires a high degree of moral education.
Or a high degree of just sensing, because, as you know, frequency has its merits. And when you feel the flow, it's much different than feeling constriction. And you don't go where you feel constriction.
We had one experiencer on the show a couple of months ago, Enrique Villanueva, talking about his contact experiences in Peru. And he also started having spontaneous out-of-body experiences as a teenager. But he learned to control it somewhat. But what he said was quite interesting. And that one time he wanted to go visit one of the little girls in his class. He was 12 years old. He wanted to go to her room at night and see if he could, in the out-of-body state, pinch her or get her attention or something like that. He said he couldn't get there, that the out-of-body universe turned all of a sudden the color yellow, and some very unpleasant beings appeared and beckoned to come with him, which he declined to do. But it was kind of interesting in that, in contrast to what you're describing, he did something that was not kosher. It goes against spiritual law to use this power.
There were repercussions.
That's right. And I said to him, isn't it interesting they use the the color yellow, which is a universal signal when you drive for danger or proceed with great caution.
Yeah.
So I wanted to contrast what you describe with what Enrique described on this show several months ago.
He took it to the point the following year, the next summer, he visited his great-grandfather up in northern Canada.
Who are we talking about now?
And this is the same gentleman that we did our out-of-body journeys together and did the experimentation with. Mm-hmm. So he was supposed to be back for school for winter quarter. He hadn't come up yet or gotten home yet. So I laid down one night, late at night, and I plugged in a tape by White Witch to a song called Help Me Lord. And I went through our procedure for establishing the telepathic communication that we developed a year before, which is basically just picturing his face, looking to his eyes, and sending a message. Well, only this time I took it to the extent of imagining that I grabbed him by the shoulders and stood him up so I could see his entire body. And then I spoke to him for a little bit, and as I was speaking to him, his girlfriend from the year before popped into the scene too, and the three of us had a conversation, and at the end of the song, we all dispersed, and I came back and went about my business. That was on an early Saturday morning. The following Friday, I call him at home. Actually, I was calling his parents to see if they knew when the heck he was going to get back, and he answers the phone out of breath. And I said, "Dude, where you been?" He said, "Well, I just got home, and I knew that was you on the phone, and so I ran in to answer it." And I said, "Okay, cool. Still got it?" And he said, "Yep." And I said, "A couple hours enough time for you to get settled?" And he said, "Yeah, come on over." So I went over, picked him up, and talked to his parents for a little bit, and then went outside, got the car, turned to him and said, "You catch any flack last weekend?" That's all I said. And he looks at me square in the eye. He said, "Yeah, you son of a bitch. You woke me up out of bed." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, somebody grabbed me by the shoulders, sat me up in bed. I opened my eyes up. There was your face, and behind yours was Carolyn's. I talked to you for a little bit. You guys split. I went back to bed."
There you have it. You had confirmation. Excellent. Right. What a wonderful experience to have, and to know that you could share it with people you're close to. That's in marked contrast with what would have happened to you if you had described this. At that time, you were involved with the Latter-day Saints. Is that correct? LDS?
No, that was 15 years later.
It was 15 years later. Okay.
Yeah.
And tell me, when you were in this out-of-body state and you travel, is it like following a geographic model? Can you just will yourself to the place and there you are, or do you have to fly to it?
Well, in most cases, it's instantaneous from what I've found. And I did a little research after one journey that I had that lasted 8 minutes, and I was taken by my guide, Zephyr, that I met when I was in college, and this was in 1989, so we fast-forwarded from 75 to 89. And he took me on a journey. Didn't really feel like there was any movement. At the beginning, it appeared like there were points of light that were streaming by and then nothing. And we're in a conversation. I'm trying to figure out, what's going on. We haven't talked with each other for probably a couple of years, and so it was a check-in to see what my progress was and any, updates or insights that he could share and things like that. And then all of a sudden, we're at this. It was like a solar system with 3 huge, luminous, white, rainbow sparkle spheres and a dozen smaller green planets. And I start to ask the question about what they are or who they are. And there was this voice, many as one, that says, "We are not only your forefathers, we're also the forefathers of your solar system." And so I start to ask questions, and Zephyr says, "Nope, that's it. You got all you need. You'll figure it out." And back we came. Took us another 8 minutes. The reason I know that is because there was a facilitator sitting next to me, and I was actually preparing to do one of William Swigard's multi-level awareness technique sessions. Swigard developed those back in the late 50s, multi-plane and multi-level. So I got the idea of, okay, we traveled somewhere. It took us 8 minutes to get there, 8 minutes to get back. That's kind of too synchronous or congruent, I guess would be the word that I'm looking for. And the only place that I ever found a reference to the speed of thought was in the Urantia book of all places, and they
You want
quoted.
to tell the audience? You want to tell the audience what the Urantia books are, because some of them may not know.
Sure. Well, it's basically one book. It's over 2,000 pages, or at least the book that I had, and it's on the spiritual material hierarchies of creation and who's in charge of what and why and how and all that kind of stuff. It's a really in-depth read. I don't know that it's also, it's 100% correct, but it sure broadens your horizon. And if you have any ideas about wanting to know about how the universe is run and the administration and, the different levels of beings and offices and responsibilities and protocols and all that kind of stuff.
And this is a channeled material, correct?
It is. It came through a farmer in the Midwest that had basically it wasn't illiterate, but he was close to it. And there was a psychologist that was working with him that began recording the material. And it's rather exquisite. But the reference to the speed of thought was 841 trillion miles per second. Right, so speed of light's 186,000 miles per second.
I see. So you were able to calculate how many light years away this star system was. Is that correct?
No, the calculator went to E when I tried.
Well, anyway, we've now talked a little bit about Zephyr, your spirit guide. In the description you've given us so far, he appears as a voice, a guiding voice, one that facilitates incredible experiences like going out to another star.
Don't miss a great offer on an incredibly fast Fios triple play. Click the banner to get 150 meg internet, TV, and phone for only $79.99 per month for the first year. Plus, you'll get a $150 Visa prepaid card with a 2-year agreement. It's your last chance to get this amazing offer before it's gone.
System. But did you ever get a chance to see him?
Yeah, I did. When I first got his name, I was reading Castanada's material, and by that time I think he had maybe 5 or 6 books out in 75, 76. And
you were in college then?
Yeah. And I was questioning if I had a guide or an ally, what his name was, how could I talk to him, all the 20 questions things. And I was meditating one afternoon, and the name Zephyr and this Indian's face popped into the center of my vision at the same instant. And he looked ancient. Eyes were kind of like coal. Stared right through me as a really cold stare, and yet there was a warmth beyond imagination that came along with them.
When you say Indian, you mean from the subcontinent or Native American?
Native American. And when we did some research, and now this is arbitrary research through a friend of mine that can do automatic writing. And, some of it's good, some of it's not, but at least it's available. So we tried to contact him. Now, here's the weird thing. A few days after I got his name and image, I heard him say, grab a pen and paper and write. I was listening to George Harrison's Living in the Material World at the time. And I wrote.
That's kind of funny.
So, it is.
There's a humor there, because living in the physical world where you're being taken into a spiritual world.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I sit down and I write 3 pages of what looks like Sanskrit. I don't know what the hell it says, and so I contact this friend of mine that he's from Evansville. His name is Jim Wilkinson. And he was raised in a metaphysical family, and his gifts were nurtured, which amazing family that it must have been to grow up in. So we get together, and I said, hey, can you contact Zephyr and see if you can interpret or find out where he was from, what he did, all that kind of stuff. And he said, sure, let's get together. So I go over to his room that weekend, and we invite him in, and Jim starts writing the same style that I did. And I said, dude, I can't read this. Can you? He says, no. I said, but it's funny that that's the same that I wrote earlier this week. And I didn't show him any of that.
Yes.
So I said, is it possible to ask your guide to interpret? And he said, don't know. Never tried it. Let's find out. And his guide's name was Herschel. So he contacted him, and evidently it worked, and we found out Zephyr supposedly was from what is now the southwestern U.S., about over 20,000 years ago. He was a shaman slash priest slash king of some kind of civilization here at that time.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is interesting. I'm getting quite a good education being a guest host on this radio show, because one of the people we interviewed several months ago, Mark Sims, he had an amazing encounter with a being that identified himself as Tejbar, who was a shaman in the Americas, not North America, but South America, the tip of Chile, Cienfuegos.
Right.
And this being, who became his spiritual guide for 2 weeks, claimed he had been a shaman in that region 4,000 years ago. And he was able to look up the name Tejbar, and it was mentioned in association with this very ancient tribe of indigenous people in the Americas. So he got a confirmation that. So this is of interest, that spirit guides take this form of North American or South American indigenous people, so-called Indians.
Now, there's an odd thing about Zephyr's name too. It means the westerly wind. So I don't know if that has any, if that has some relation to it or not. But there again is another interesting similarity and synchronicity of understanding.
Yeah, I could wonder about Eastern versus Western wind in terms of the cultural developments, because, all this interest in Buddhism, Zen, meditation, Tai Chi, all this comes from the East initially. Right. And after the Second World War, there was openness. You had the 60s, rock and roll, as well as the Beatles with their spiritual quest in a New Age fashion. And now a driving force in spirituality on this planet is coming from the West. And you are perhaps part of that Western wind.
I'd like to think so. I live it. I don't just talk about it. I live it in everything that I do, and I'm quite transparent and open about it in pretty much every place that I go. I don't know a stranger, and everybody's fair game.
Yeah, I never met someone I didn't like. I've heard that said too. That's a wonderful sentiment, and you were able to increasingly share your status as a contactee as time went on.
Yeah.
I'd like to just take a little bit of a break now, because we have some housekeeping to take care of. I want to tell the audience that you're listening to Epic Voyages. My name is Dr. Joseph Burkes, and our special guest tonight is Zen Benefiel. We're talking about his experiences as, well, I should say, an enlightened human with a contactee background who continues to practice cosmic oneness.
And by all means, if you're curious, Google me or just go to zenbenefiel.com. That's my digital vitae currently, and you'll find out a lot of stuff.
That's great. So let's talk about Epic Voyages, because I'm going to tell you how important this show is and how you can reach us from a multitude of places. So Epic Voyages, you can visit us, of course, epicvoyages.com, and you can listen to us for up-to-date information on exciting Epic Voyages projects. You can hear about our upcoming radio shows. From there, you can link to our Facebook page. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and of course, to our YouTube page. You can also catch us every Monday night, as you are tonight, or if this is a rebroadcast, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. INR offers you, yes, you, several opportunities to tune in and not miss a beat. This includes listening to us via your television set, via Roku's TV set top media player. You can download the IRN app on your Android, iPhone, BlackBerry, and Amazon smartphone, or through their syndicated streaming partners like TuneIn, iTunes, and Google Play Music. This show is also available on your car stereo via Stitcher's Radio Vehicle Dashboard app. And lastly, even if your power goes out, you can listen to us through an old-fashioned tethered phone line by dialing 401-267 401-8300. That's 401-267-8300. The show is broadcast every Friday night on Dark Matter Digital Network at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. If you absolutely can't catch us on the air, don't worry. You can catch this show as well as hundreds of past epic shows by visiting irnshows.com. That's irnshows.com. We invite you to join our conversation through IRN's live chat room at irnchatroom.com. That's IRN chat room. Correction, that's irnchat.com. irnchat.com. You can also get your questions and comments to us by Skyping Inception Radio Network or dialing into 888-919-2355. That's 888-919-2355. Well, taking care of housework, we've got another 17 minutes or so till we get to our break. I'm talking to Zen Benefiel about his lifelong contact experiences that include out-of-body travel, having a Native American spirit guide, as well as numerous encounters with extraterrestrial intelligence. We were talking about your development, and we've gone through the elementary school, college days. Let's talk a little bit about the amazing events that happened in your young adulthood. You had a lot of responsibility, a dad at a young age. Well, it was young for me. I think was it 29 when you had your first child?
No, I was 21. By 29, I had 4.
Okay, here we go. So that is quite a story.
I'm a great grandfather now.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And so you had responsibility at home. You were a precision machinist in the aerospace industry.
Yep.
Along that way, you also joined the LDS Church. Is that correct? Latter-day Saints?
Yes.
And you worked in service to your faith and became a volunteer official. These are called elders within the Mormon faith, correct?
Right. And there's an entire process that you go through and hoops that you jump through to gain the level of Melchizedek priesthood, where that you are bestowed that by a laying on of hands and of other elders, and so it's a service level and recognition and devotion to serving.
I had some experiences with the Latter-day Saints Church. There was a time when I was a spiritual seeker. I come from a background very different from you, Zen. I was raised in a totally secular, agnostic family. I was indoctrinated in left-wing, so-called scientific socialism, which is another way of saying Marxism. My mother was a trade unionist, so I didn't experience my spirituality in a satisfying form until I had actually joined the contact movement, and I became an activist within the CE5 initiative. But even as a child, being raised by agnostics or maybe atheists, I would go into churches and I would just feel a sense of peace and oneness, and I knew somewhere I was missing out on very important experiences, spiritual experiences. And later I got to become more spiritual in the course of contact work. But for you, it was part of your living day, everyday breathing reality. Do you want to tell us something a little more about the cosmology of the Latter-day Saints? Because when I was a seeker, I went to the Mormon temple in the Bay Area, and they took me into a room that was absolutely amazing. It was called the Universe Room. It was darkened. It was flooded with UV light, and all the ceiling, walls, and even the floor had points of light that made you feel as if you were suspended in deep space. It was an experience I'll never forget, and it was provided to seekers like myself to let them know what might be in store for them if they join the faith. Well, I did not join the faith, but I would like to talk to you a little bit, if possible, about the cosmology of the Mormon Church, because like a lot of the 18th, 19th, and 20th century New Age religions, they assign a very important role to life on other planets, and it's part of their faith.
Indeed. And, what I found resonant with me is this idea of being gods and goddesses in embryo, and that at some point we would be able to join in creation of something. provided we, go down the right path, so to speak.
Is there reincarnation as part of the Mormon faith?
Not so much. They follow biblical teachings first of all, and the Book of Mormon is only a historical reference about Jesus' appearance in the Western Hemisphere. So there's really not a lot of additional things other than testimonies of Jesus' appearances, and there were some things that, in addition to what the Bible has said, that I remember one of the things that Jesus was quoted on was that it was pleasing to him if we do not eat meat, but if we do, only in times of extreme cold and or famine. So I found that
those are comments that are consistent with eco-consciousness today in terms of how meat is so very precious in terms of its consumption of an essential ingredient on this planet, which is water. 1 pound of beef requires hundreds of gallons of water.
Yeah. And it's also congruent with the teachings of the Ascended Masters that Guy Ballard wrote about in the late 20s, and that the killing of any life form was not consistent with the better use of valor, so to speak.
But you were not able to share your out-of-body travel and your spirit guide with any of the people in the LDS Church outside of your wife. Is that correct?
And my wife was scared to death of this stuff.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because one of the things I had to do as a team leader, for 5 years I was a working group coordinator for the CE5 initiative. And as a volunteer, I took my job very seriously. Great work, too. And I went out to the homes of people who were in the team, and I met with their spouses, and I spent much time counseling them about the work we were doing and why it was important. And being a physician in a very large medical group, I was able to reassure them that the work we were doing together in terms of contacting or attempting to contact extraterrestrials was safe, it was spiritually sound, and it was something that was of importance not just to us but to all of humanity. So I understand how important it is to have emotional support from your spouse when you have these kind of life experiences, because when that emotional support is not there, it can lead to all kinds of suffering, including divorce, which is a great tragedy when it happens.
And it did.
And it did. So you felt the lack of support at home and in your church, and that was an additional strain on you. And yet you had a spirit guide to back you up. And
it was fun, Joe. It seemed like the whole my whole external world at that time kind of flipped on me. My work, I was had gotten off the shop floor and was a production control coordinator in charge of $7 million a month in shipments, and these were commercial aircraft spare parts. And I excelled. My on-time delivery and goals monthly were above anyone else in the department, and I'd suggested having interpersonal skills classes as a result of that when I was asked how I could manage that on a regular basis. And that became, I was 26, 27 at the time, and didn't realize corporate culture, and it just pissed everybody else off. So
you're overproducing, and the trade unionists didn't want you to do that, right?
Yeah, well, not necessarily. It wasn't that I was overproducing. It was that I called them on their immature behavior.
Oh, that sounds even worse.
It was. And that's about the time that I started Be the Dream, to bring that, about to a different level. And so I ended up getting demoted the same week that I got divorced, and was attempted to be excommunicated from the church the following, a few months later. So my life just turned completely around. But I got to tell you, that following year, where I had freedom to find myself again, was the most wonderful year of my life because I totally let go of all my attachments to people, places, and things, and just started inquiring within again.
I think the expression is no good deed goes unpunished.
Exactly.
And you were struggling to take care of your family. You were involved with church. You were rewarded for being a leader in your workplace by producing very well. You were rewarded by being ordered to attend a workshop where you're supposed to develop your social skills. And
no, it's not what happened.
No.
They asked me how I was doing what I did.
I see.
I suggested to them to institute interpersonal skills classes.
Oh, okay. Well, that sounds better then. I thought they were punishing you.
Yeah.
And so when it rains, it pours, and this was a very tough time in your life. But some assistance appeared. We're talking about now, it's 1988, is that right? Or is this?
Yes.
There's a series of events happened in the late 80s to you, which I'd like to very much share with our listeners. We're going to start that discussion because our break is coming up in a few minutes.
Sure.
But tell me about those events in 1988, those highly synchronous events. Maybe we can hear about Jabbar and someone named Lawrence Schmidt.
Yeah, this is totally weird shit. So...
Well, this is a family radio show, so let's try to keep the four-letter words to a minimum, okay?
Okay. So anyway, beginning this summer, I was approached by one of the local newspapers to write an article, and so I wrote it on the evolution of humanity and what state we're in and how we could evolve together and go beyond this barbaric nature that we seem to still want to behave like. So in June, towards the end of the month, right before my birthday, a friend of mine was renting the guest house at the place that I had, and we went to a full moon meditation together, came back, we're sitting in the front of the guest house, 2:00 in the morning. We had a really deep conversation that had fallen quiet at the moment, and I closed my eyes and just on a whim, I went inside and I asked the question, who am I? Because I was still carrying this since childhood. Never really got a good answer yet. And as soon as I asked the question, silently within, he turns to me and he says, "You are Zendor." And I'm like, huh? And at the same instant, my second sight, which is the internal sight, for those who may not be aware, kind of the screen came on, and this was my eyes open. So I'm looking at him with my eyes open, and I'm seeing this other imagery in another region of my brain.
So wait, let's just stop for a moment to recap, because this is something people need to understand. You were mulling over that forever question about your identity, about who am I, what's my name. But this is you're doing this mentally, quietly, and then your friend, out of the blue, answers the question you've just been mulling over. Is that correct?
Precisely.
And you did not prompt him, you did not discuss this with him, he just came out. Did he know?
No. And it had nothing to do with the previous conversation we were in either.
Did he know why he said it?
Not really, because at the time we were just being open, and we were in this blissful state after having an evening of meditation, and so we were in that high-minded state, for lack of a better. And so when you're open to those kinds of things, you're open to those kinds of things. And when he said it, he kind of got a weird look in his eye, but he said, "Oh, that was weird," Mm-hmm. But at the same instant, when my second sight came on, I saw this starscape with this stone arched doorway and a thick wooden door slowly opening towards me, and I heard a voice say, "Door to what is." And so Zen door to what is, it's like, cheap divine comedy, if you will. But I didn't know what to do with it at the time. So I put it on the shelf. I didn't say anything to anybody else. And then a couple of years later, I was producing and hosting a television show that we called One World. And I was interviewing people from all walks of life about how they got where they were at, what prompted them to do what they were doing from both inner and outer perspectives, what fears they encountered, how they overcame them, and how they saw that fitting into the common human experience around them. And about 6 shows in, one of my friends that was on the crew, who was a Sikh, called me Zen. And I used Zen door as the subheading.
Mm-hmm.
So it just, it happened, it rolled out, and I've been going by Zen ever since.
That's true. We have some questions from the chat room.
Sure.
Daria Abedanova asks our guest, does the guest manifest these encounters in his mind before they materialize, or do you, Zen, find yourself involved without seeing the process of how you got there? In other words,
Yes.
You plan out these encounters? Go ahead.
Both.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We have about 2 minutes to go before our break. I want to ask the audience to stay with us. You've been listening to Dr. Joe Burkes, your guest host for today, and our very special guest today, a man from Arizona with lifelong experiences as a contactee, and Zen. We will be back in just a few minutes to further get into his life story. We're going to be talking about additional amazing events that happened in the late 1980s and 90s, which radically changed his worldview and put him in a position to carry out what he received as a mission as a teenager, and to work for global and planetary and cosmic unity. So this is the subject of much discussion. Right now, I've been working with many different groups, and we're going to hear about some of the New Age groups that Zen helped organize back in the late 80s and early 90s. So we'll be going to the break right now. Welcome back to the show. You're listening to Epic Voyages. My name is Dr. Joseph Burkes, and we're on the Inception Radio Network. And we have our guest with us today on Skype, Zen Benefiel, lifelong contactee, out-of-body traveler, father, grandfather,